Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Ranks FC. It's your favourite transatlantic football podcast, back for another week. My name's Jack Collins, and I'll be your host today. And joining me across the water, all the way from San Diego, it's Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yep, all good over here. Thank you, mate. Yep, off to the mighty San Diego FC tonight. My first ever Leagues Cup game. That's kicking off now over here. I don't know if that's going to mean low attendance or high attendance, to be honest. They're playing against Pachuca. I've got a feeling it might be a low attendance. I wonder if it might be like Carabao Cup first round. But I'm excited because something new.
I thought you might get Club Tijuana, and then there'll be a real cross-border divide going on.
That would have been a good one, yeah.
Interesting one to have. I think there'll be a high attendance for this.
Do you? Yeah, I don't
know how much tickets cost. How much do tickets cost? Does it come with your season ticket?
Yeah, so this comes with season ticket. But the reason I fear a low attendance is because a few season tickets that I know just seem like they can't be bothered with this one, so they're not going. And that's why I'm kind of comparing it in my head to Carabao Cup first round. But hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully there's loads of people that kind of have an interest in it because it's a different competition or have a different in the Mexican side of it. So that'll be fun. How about you, mate? What have you been up to?
I was actually talking today on the radio to the executive director of the Leagues Cup.
Look at you.
Look at me go, right? And I was kind of asking him about it and asking some questions about whether it was going to stay in the US or whether it could go, kind of like swing like the Ashes. One season it goes in America and next season it's in Mexico, or, like the Ryder Cup. Switches sides. And he was like, yeah, it's something we're open to in the future. We've been trying to kind of find the right format for the competition. And look, one of the things that we talked about with being a positive with the Club World Cup was games against teams from different confederations, right? It was the games where it was all one confederation that we found a little bit duller than the others for the most part, I think. So the fact that all three of the first stage games for San Diego will be against teams from Liga MX, I think is quite interesting, quite exciting, and potentially adds a little bit of a new dimension to it. So I'm coming in with an open mind. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, good. That's interesting to know. I've got a spare ticket for tonight if you want to come.
I would do, but I'm going to see Oasis tomorrow, so I feel like the flights might just put me in a little bit of jeopardy.
All right. How to put me in my place. Go and see my favourite band that I'm crying here every day about not seeing. Nice one.
Stop crying your heart out. That's quite enough from you. Right, let's get on with this. Today we're going to be talking about some transfer windows that I have found interesting. I'm taking the load off Dean's shoulders for a week and planned my own episode to talk about transfer windows that I've found interesting so far. So we'll be getting into that in the main segment. Before we get to that, let's do a little bit of things we love, shall we? I'm going to hand the mic over to you to get us going.
Yeah, I just have found something interesting this week, and I was wondering what else it might lead to, and it was the resurgence potentially of Kobbie Mainoo. So obviously there's been issues around Mainoo at Man United and didn't really fit in, had an injury. Amorim doesn't know where to trust him, where to play him. And, his future uncertain, no new contract signed yet, doesn't earn the sort of money that some people in that Man United team do. And obviously there's the potential there as a young player that's come through the system to sell him for big money. And there'll be a temptation sometimes around that. And I've reported recently how Tottenham are one of the teams that have checked in on this because of the market opportunity that surrounds Mainoo. And, if there are doubts there, this would be a good time to move for him. Key stage in his own career. Obviously, we're building to a World Cup year now, and that's a time when players have to think even more clearly than normal about what their season is going to look like because they need the minutes. And Mainoo should come into that. But then speaking to a couple of people that are around Man United or who cover Man United, and then he plays his first game of pre-season, and there's a lot of praise for Kobbie Mainoo in terms of his application and his attitude and his conditioning. And I'm wondering, we're about to see a resurgence of this lad. And maybe after all it might be at Man United and that he can fit back in. Now, in the game the other day against West Ham, he played kind of alongside Ugarte. But obviously, Mainu has more to his game than that. He can be defensive, but he can also obviously get forwards with the ball, and he can do well in tight spaces, can run with it well, and he can be creative. So there's a lot to this player, and I don't think Man United can really afford to let a player like this go. I don't mean like literally like they shouldn't sell him because they don't need money, because they do need money. But you've got to find some identity at some point and nail it down. And I don't think that Mainu is the sort of player that you should be giving up on at this stage, even if a big offer comes. I think it'd have to be a really big offer, actually, to get Mainu out of there. And I know that there are talks ongoing to get him this new contract. So there is still some determination from all parties to make this work. But it also made me think about players who are now beginning pre-season and who else might find themselves catapulted into the first team frame and having to take an opportunity. We'll see and hear a lot about players in the coming weeks who are on the fringes and trying to figure out whether they give it a bash or whether they go out on loan. Mikey Moore of Tottenham going out on loan. I was kind of surprised. I thought he might get an opportunity, but he's going to go on loan. And there are players like that have big decisions to make over the next couple of weeks. And it happens at every level of player. So Mikey Moore, someone who's just breaking through. Kobbie Mainoo, somebody that's already broken through, if you like. But there'll be players across the board that are looking to now take that step. You know, even get Harvey Elliott at Liverpool, who's clearly an established Premier League player at this point. But you're thinking, but do I fit in? Am I actually going to play here? Is Harvey Elliott going to stick it out at Liverpool? Is he going to go and test himself abroad? Does he go back to Fulham? Like, what happens? Like, those sorts of conundrums are going to be thrown up as we now get to August and the final month of the transfer window. So I'm kind of using Mainoo's good start to the summer as the kind of poster boy for it. But I think it will be reflected in a lot of other players across the Premier League and beyond as we now get into the exciting times where we start to judge what's coming up, mate.
It feels like the dominoes are starting to fall in certain areas. Now, I've used this analogy before, but we talk about the fact that, it feels like certain moves have to happen and then suddenly people have money and suddenly these bids start going in seriously. And it's all been obviously there's been deals done, but a lot of the big ones, there's speculation and interest until that money kind of goes on the table. It's starting to feel like those things are falling into place. I watched Manchester United against West Ham at the weekend in the summer series, and I was relatively impressed with the way that they went about their business. And honestly, you're kind of looking and saying, okay, one, it was a relatively poor West Ham outfit and they really have work to do, I think, from their perspective. But looking at the way that United set up, it looked like players were starting to come to terms with the way that the setup was looking and what Amorim wants from this system. I thought the United were far higher up the pitch than they were during the back end of last season, and seeing them kind of start to play those through balls well. Now, look, Rasmus Højlund may well not be the answer in terms of the number 9. And we know that there's an ongoing discussion in terms of what that is. But actually, I thought that Ugarte and Mainoo controlled it quite well in the middle. I thought that Cunha and Bruno worked quite nicely together in terms of standing outside it and being those two number 10s. And you're starting to see, look, again, I don't want to count any chickens before they're hatched. I'm not saying that this is the be all and end all, or that it will stay the way that it's looking at the moment. But I do think in terms of what we saw at the weekend, they look like far more of a strategy, far more of a style associated with Manchester United, as opposed to the kind of chaos that consumed the end of last season. Now, whether that's a flash in the pan or whether that's something that they can hang on to is something that is obviously yet to be seen. And I don't, as I say, I don't think we can
I'll have a guess.
Make, but it was a start, and look, they needed something to kind of kick into gear after that incredibly drab 0-0 draw with Leeds that they played out the week before.
Yeah, that's fair. What do you make of this summer series? Because there's been a bit of reporting around this being a flop, and that they might have to decide whether they can it or not. The Premier League defending it, but apparently it lost a lot of money last time around, and it's not been amazing in terms of outreach and full stadium at this point. I'm imagining this is something you've probably talked about on the radio as well.
Yeah, I mean, we had Anton Ferdinand on discussing it actually at the end of last week, and he's there as an ambassador for West Ham, and he
He's
was
selling the tournament.
Well, he seemed genuinely pleasantly surprised with the amount of people that he'd seen at the kind of events and whatever. And he was telling us how he was selling pie and mash outside the Rockefeller Center and helping people kind of understand the culture of the club and all these things. So there's an element of gimmickry around all of it, right? But it's an opportunity. I think that given this summer that there has been plenty of football around, both with the tournaments on the ground in the US and the fact that there was a Club World Cup that kind of garnered intrigue as much as interest, I think, for lots of people. I think it was maybe a difficult summer to actually go and be like, cool, we're going to do another preseason tour. Whilst there's all these things going on, you mentioned the fact that, you're going to the Leagues Cup tonight, whilst MLS is still in full swing, whilst there's a Club World Cup, whilst there's a Gold Cup, there's loads and loads of things happening at the same time, right? So I can understand why maybe the appetite for tickets, etc., to this tournament of all of them is probably diminished a little bit. But in terms of, I don't watch the summer series because I'm excited to see, how much of it is going to be absolutely unbelievable atmospheres. I watch it because I'm interested to see what teams are kind of putting together ahead of the season ahead. So from my perspective, it's doing exactly what I need it to. I imagine from the Premier League's perspective and from a monetary perspective, maybe that's slightly different in terms of what they're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, I just think that the glamour of these fixtures has died off a bit, hasn't it? There's been so much football played over here, especially recently, which has actually been competitive football, that it's hard to get too much excitement and anticipation around pre-season games. And if the pricing's good, then everything else is good. But ultimately, it's usually pretty hard to reach the prices that are put on football out here. So, yeah, very interesting. I just wanted to get your opinion on that, Jack.
I mean, I actually think the double headers is quite a smart move. Like, as in, you're like, cool, I'll buy a ticket for one game, even if I support one of these teams. Am I going to, chance if the other game's afterwards and I've got the day off, do I just go and watch it anyway? So, look, I don't think that's a particularly poor decision. I think that's quite smart in terms of making it work. But, we'll see what happens in the next two venues when it moves around the country and see if there's a little bit more uptake than there was at the weekend. Just before we move on to our main segment, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Lionesses, who obviously went back to back in terms of European championships. And look, it was a performance full of gut and full of heart and full of spirit, and some huge, huge performances from big characters. I was out for a walk around Hamwell earlier, and there was a mural of Chloe Kelly being painted on the side of a coffee shop, which made me really happy. The pride of W7 getting her due in so many ways. But hey, look, to score the winning goal in the last Euros final, which I was at Wembley, and then to go and score the winning penalty in a second, I mean, that's pretty unbelievable in terms of what you're putting together and as a CV in terms of international recognition. Shouts out to Chloe Kelly because she's been, absolutely sensational when she's been called upon. She's been such a key part of this. Michelle Adjumang having her breakout tournament as well, keeping them in games late on, saving games in so many ways. But the Lionesses were ahead in terms of in a game for 1 minute of the knockout stages. And that was the last minute of the game against Italy when it scored 119th minute penalty to go 2-1 ahead. It was the only time in all of it that they were ahead in the knockout stages. And they've gone and won it and beaten Spain, who were overwhelming favourites on penalties. They weren't probably the better side on the day, but they found a way. And, to go and retain that title is nothing to be sneered at. I'm going to do a full episode on the Women's Euros and the final and the Lionesses. And we had some lovely comments on that and that game and what it means to people on our Patreon. So if you're interested in more of this kind of thing, then come over there and I'm going to be doing a full show on that over the next couple of days. But I didn't want to let it pass without giving some due to the Lionesses, because to win it once is something. To win it back to back and retain a trophy is always incredible. And the way in which they did it, Hannah Hampton being, short-sighted and not being able to have depth perception at the start of her life. No one was like, you'll never be an athlete, to go and save as many penalties as she did in the knockout stages. Chloe Kelly coming up with the goods, Michelle Adjumang coming up with the goods, Jess Carter fighting through an incredible amount of personal scrutiny and some ridiculous outrage and comments on her social medias to go and put in a worldy performance in the final. it was really quite something as a storyline, and I thought it should just get some recognition.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as I say, like following that tournament from America didn't really work out because it just wasn't a natural thing to be doing. You have to kind of seek it out. But my English friends that have been visiting, I'd obviously been wrapped up in the tournament up to getting here, and they were like, "We've got to watch the final. Like we've watched all the games. Like we have to watch the final." So they did, and they were very excited about the outcome of it. So that's cool. I'm glad for everybody that was able to get involved in all of that. Jack, before we do go on to the next segment, there's one last thing I wanted to mention in things I love. It was something I saw this morning, and that was that Liverpool are apparently working on the concept of using Ekitike and Florian Wirtz as part of a front two. And it's something that they're going to be working on. And the concept has been out there that what if Slot is working on a 4-2-4? And I was like, this is the chaos we've been talking about. I've been talking about this in ranks. Chaos is coming, and this is what we're here for. So keep an eye out for this sort of stuff, because I honestly think that this season, and a thing I really will love, is if we're getting a different style of football from everybody. And I mean like up against each other with different styles of football, rather than everyone just trying this playing out the back slow stuff and then bursting out the traps once you get halfway up the field and try to press and win the ball back and all that stuff. So yeah, that was something that I meant to throw into this episode today, and I'm glad I haven't forgotten.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that looks. I've been intrigued by how this is going to work, and obviously there is the potential of adding Alexander Isak to this chaos front line as well, which would really be something.
So it'd be Isak, Ekitike, Wirtz, and Salah as their front four.
Yeah, it's quite something, isn't it? It really is quite something. Whether it works or not is a very different question.
How can it not?
I don't know.
You'll score loads of goals. I mean, the middle two better be really good at running, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of work for Dominic Soboslai coming, is what I would probably guess in terms of how this is going to shake out. But we shall see. Yeah. All right, we're going to take a little break there. When we come back, we're talking about some clubs who are having very, very interesting windows. Stick with us here on Ranks FC.
Welcome back to Ranks FC, and I get to put my feet up today. Jack really surprised me, everybody, by announcing in the build-up to this podcast that he already had a podcast plan in place. I was like, I haven't thought about it, I haven't got a plan for today. And he was like, I have, it's done. I was like, you absolute legend. You absolute ledge. You've really helped me out here today. So I assume it's going to be good. I assume it'll be different from all the other transfer stuff that I've talked about so far across this summer. So I'm looking forward to learning something, Mo.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. I basically decided that there were certain clubs that I think are really interesting that we haven't talked about yet, who have already done, quite a lot of business, either in or out. And I think there's quite a lot to be discussed. So I've picked 5 clubs that I think we should talk about that we haven't done too much on. So obviously there's interesting transfer windows. We just talked about Liverpool. That's an incredibly interesting transfer window, but we've also discussed quite a lot of it to death already. So I'm going to try and take us a little bit off the beaten track, not too far. I'm not going too far into the wilderness, I do promise, but I've picked 5 clubs. 2 of them are Premier League clubs. One of them is in Liga, one of them is in Serie A, and one of them is in La Liga for us to discuss. I'm going to start with 2 clubs in the Premier League, and I'm going to start with 2 promoted clubs in the Premier League. So yesterday, Dean, I was on a shoot, which was a fan of each Premier League club going and basically trying to work out what the season predictions are and all these things. And a lot of these times, these are quite, there's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of arguing, etc. And I'm trying to learn about other clubs' kind of perspectives, and everyone's just sort of yapping away. But this was actually quite fun. I had a good time. It'll be on Zach Delap's channel later on in the summer. But I struck up quite a nice relationship with the Leeds and Sunderland fans, and I was discussing it with them. So basically, every time we did a season prediction, the Burnley fan would go and stand in 20th. Shout out to Jacob, who was just like, yeah, there's no way we're coming anywhere but bottom, I'm afraid. Okay. He was like, we just haven't done enough. And if this squad was based on a watertight defence, it's probably not going to be watertight in the Premier League. We don't have enough attacking talent, and James Trafford's about to sign for City. I was like, right, fair enough. That does actually sound quite tough from your perspective, Jacob. But he seemed okay with it. He was like, we're gonna use this as a building block. So fine. The Sunderland and Leeds fans, both quite bullish. Now, obviously you kind of associate that with the two clubs. But I thought it was interesting, the kind of the arguments they were making, and they were quite counter arguments. I'm going to start with Leeds. So obviously they've lost a few players. Rasmus Christensen was out on loan last year. That's been made permanent to Eintracht Frankfurt. They lost Junior Firpo, who was a big part of their promotion season. He's gone back to Real Betis after the expiration of his contract. Max Werber has gone to Werder Bremen on loan. And Joshua Gilavogi has been released. He's signed on a 6-month contract in the middle of last season, just a bit of experience in there and helped them over the line, but was never kind of a key member of that squad. So actually, in terms of retaining, you'd say that only at left back have they had a major, major blow in terms of what they were doing from last season. Now, we talk about winning the championship and all these elements. Winning the championship doesn't really mean anything in terms of, can you make that step up? It can mean something. And I think that there has often been a chance that the teams who get promoted automatically get a little bit more time to do their business than the team that goes up through the playoffs. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything, especially if you come up playing really cool, free-flowing football, you pummel everyone in the championship, and you suddenly get to the Premier League and it's not applicable. It's about being able to adapt. And one of the things we said, I've brought this up on the Patreon before, one of the things we said back in, I think it was October when we were on The Truth with Doogie and Sam, was that one of the things a promoted club has to do in order to try and survive, give themselves the best possible chance of surviving, is they've got to become massive physical duel winners in the centre of the park. Or Leeds is becoming the land of the giants. The land of the giants. Let's just quickly run through the players they've signed. So Anton Stack has come in, midfielder from Hoffenheim, £17 million. He's a big lump who plays in defensive midfield slot. He basically did his first interview and they were like, what can we expect from you? He was like, I love winning the ball. I love smashing into challenges and really getting into people. I was like, right, you'll be okay, I think. Jacobi Joel signed from Udinese, the defender, £15 million. I think you'll remember that, at the Euros last summer was one of the players that really stood out. And there was a lot of love for him at the time as someone who was like, oh, okay, you look like you may be able to make the step up. 23 years old. And he said, basically, I think I'm ready for the Premier League. I think that Leeds are ready for the Premier League. And then they also signed Sebastian Bornau, who's 6'3" from Wolfsburg, who is another centre-back. So they've signed 2 centre-backs who are both over 6'3" and a defensive midfielder who is over 6 foot and loves smashing into people. You can start to see where I'm going with this. Now, it's not all about physicality, right? Like, you still have to have the technical ability to match. You still have to be able, but it's a start, right? Because if you are being run through on a regular basis and you have no ability to compete in those areas, you're going to struggle. And I think that what Leeds are doing here is they are building the spine of a team from a kind of central position that allows them to compete physically with teams. And look, fly back to Marcelo Bielsa's Leeds, right? They weren't necessarily the biggest team in the world, but what did they do? They competed physically in terms of exertion, in terms of work rate, in terms of pressing. All of those things were quite key to the fact that they were able to compete and stay up in that season, more than stay up. Right? They finished almost in the top half of the table. So what are Leeds learning in terms of lessons? Well, that maybe that situation and the whole Bielsa thing is, one, you can't recreate, and two, ends up with a point of burnout that they didn't really recover from, right? In that second season after he left. But when you kind of look at what else they've done here, so they bring in Luca Perry, who is the goalkeeper from Lyon. He was Lyon's number 1 last season, going to be replaced there by Matt Turner, which is interesting. But he's basically come in being like, oh, I'm going to bring some calm after what happened. And, I think the thing is that I feel really sorry for Illan Meslier because he was touted as one of the best young goalkeeping prospects in Europe. He was a player playing in the Premier League at such a young age. Like, who else at his age has got the experience he's got? Now, it's just gone sliding down a pan for him. And we saw some of the mistakes that happened last year. I think Leeds fans would have been absolutely bricking it had they come into the season with Meslier in goal. And so they had to make a change. But Luca Perry comes in, and whilst I don't think he's the best goalkeeper in the world, I think that there is a sense there that he comes in and he's like, okay, I'm just a little bit of a safer pair of hands. Maybe I don't make as many absolutely incredible stops, but I'm also not going to let the ball dribble through my legs. I've also got a better command of my area. And these things are important in terms of building belief. And what Ellen Road can do when it believes, what Ellen Road can produce as an atmosphere when they're behind that team and they're not worried about every pass of the ball back to the goalkeeper, I think is an important part of all of this. Then they bring a little bit of Premier League experience in Shawnee Longstaff, who joins from Newcastle United. £12 million feels like a little bit of a snip for Shawnee Longstaff, who's been a pretty reliable Premier League servant. Maybe not good enough for where Newcastle are trying to be and where they're trying to get to, but in terms of a lower Premier League side, I think that Sean Longstaff is a very smart little addition there in terms of experience. And then they replace the left back they lose in Junior Firpo with Gabriel Gudmundsson, who is an experienced player, 26 years old, Swedish left back. And they bring him in from Lille, where he had an incredible record at scoring goals. Now, obviously, there's a certain system that allows him to get forward a little bit more at Lille, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later, spoilers. But I think that the fact that they have been able to bring in a defender who was that good on the European stage, who kind of shone in the Europa and Conference Leagues, and who is able to kind of recreate the output that Junior Firpo did, getting up and down that wing in a big way, I think is really exciting for them. And they add Luka Nemecha as well from Wolfsburg on a free transfer, who's obviously a former Manchester City youth prospect, has had a couple of years in the Bundesliga. He joins as well. He's a bit of the wild card in all this. Now, you'll notice, and there is some drawbacks to this, that Leeds have focused very much on stacking out this defensive midfield. It looks pretty good now. There's a number one in place. They've got 2 new centre-backs, a new left-back. They're going to be all right in these different areas. They brought in 2 midfielders to kind of sharpen that out, and then an attacking player in a Mecha. There is nowhere near enough in the attacking tank right now. And there was excitement over Igor Paixão, who was linked from PSV, who's had an incredible season last year. That one's off now. It looks like he's going to Marseille. They've got a couple of different options on the table here as well. They need a number 9. Obviously, Patrick Bamford has said that he's not in the plans for Daniel Farke. Mateo Joseph wants to go back to Spain. So they're going to let him go. It leaves Joel Pirot looking very lonely up top. We've seen those bids for Rodrigo Muniz at Fulham. I don't think it's impossible to get him out of Fulham. I think it's going to take a lot of money. I don't know if Leeds are going to put that money on the table, but they will have other options in those areas as well. So whether it's him or someone else, I think that they're going to probably bring in Delane Bakwa, who was at Strasbourg last season. He's the one that they seem to have turned to after the Paixão deal fell through. And I think that there's some excitement there about what these players can produce. You know, we've seen, obviously, Wilfried Gnonto in the Premier League before. They're going to have Daniel James and Jack Harrison, who, whilst are not pulse raisers in terms of players who are going to be like, wow, can they be the difference? They are both players with Premier League experience. And that is important at this point as well. If they're the backups and they're coming on knowing that they have already played in this league and done their bit, that changes the picture a little bit. So I think Leeds still have work to do, but I do really like their business in terms of how they've replaced the key man who departed, and then how they've gone about kind of stacking this team out with the ability to compete from a physical perspective in the Premier League.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the strikers they've been linked with too is Artem Dovbyk of Roma. I mean, now that's a statement. And that kind of ticks both boxes.
I don't know if he's going to leave. I wouldn't leave a team that just brought Gianpiero Gasperini in when he juices every attacking number known to man. But I take your point.
But yeah, you know, the stories are coming out of Italy rather than England, which is interesting because why would Italian press suddenly link, a Roma striker with Leeds? Like, if you were a Leeds outlet, I could understand why that would come about. You're just looking around for a forward who's strong and good. He ticks both those boxes. But I mean, like, that would really intrigue me about if they could do something at that level. Because it's still going to be difficult. Like, obviously, they're giving it a good go. But Leeds have to come on a long way from last season to give themselves a chance. At least they're trying to do that. But I think they just need a slight elevation yet on the actual quality of the signings.
I think there's a couple of question marks, right? There is one over the number 9 and who actually leads that line. If it is Joel Pirot, who comes in to back him up? And they probably need another kind of X-factor winger. The biggest question mark is probably Daniel Farke, right? Who's had a go a couple of times in the Premier League, who has suffered relegation a couple of times in the Premier League, and who Leeds didn't feel like they were sure about at the end of last season. They thought about pulling that trigger. They've decided to stick with their man. But I would also imagine that this Leeds, in this iteration, probably are not going to be too shy about pulling the trigger if they start this season badly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they spent so far, about £65 million, and they've got a few players in for that amount. But you talk about someone like Muniz, he's going to cost you £50 million on his own. So that suggests to me that he's probably out of reach. And Fulham should be tying him down to a new deal anyway.
It depends what they get in for Matteo Joseph, right? If they get 20 million through the door, then suddenly those books don't look quite as bad anymore in terms of, being able to balance it out over a 3-year period.
Yeah, it's true. So let's see. But yeah, Leeds are back, and they need to stay this time because they are genuinely too big for the Championship. Like, this team should be in the Premier League.
Yes, indeed. I think that it's going to be very interesting seeing how they go about it. Talking of splashing the cash, let's go over to Sunderland, shall we? Because I think they've given themselves a puncher's chance as well. Now, again, before we go into the kind of ins and outs, they need more. And right now they're going in with Anthony Patterson as number one. I don't think any Sunderland fan is particularly convinced by that, despite his heroics in the playoff final. And I think that it feels like they probably need at least one centre-back through the door as well. Now, there are links, and there are some really interesting links as well. John Lukumi at Bologna being the kind of main one. And there's a bit of a standoff at the moment, it seems, over that one. But they've gone about this in a slightly different way. They've gone and done the midfield in a similar kind of situation. They lost Joe Bellingham, obviously, who's gone off to Borussia Dortmund to follow his brother's footsteps for £27 million, which I think is a record sale. They also lost Tom Watson to Brighton. That one was done in April. He ended up scoring the playoff winner for Sunderland, but he has departed for Brighton. They've been very quick in replacing Bellingham. Habib Diarra came in from Strasbourg, who I really like, Senegal international. You might remember he scored against England in a recent friendly. And I'm quite excited to see how he gets on. They've also added Noah Siddiqui into that midfield from Union Saint-Gilloise, who can play a couple of different positions. He can play in the defensive line, he can play a defensive midfield. So there's a couple of different things that he can do, but I think that they probably look to play those two as a defensive shield, if I'm being honest. And then they brought in Reynildo from Atletico Madrid on a free transfer, who said he's always wanted to play in the Premier League, and he's excited to come in here. Now, he'll compete with Dennis Serkin for that left-back spot, but Serkin will start the season injured. So it's Reynildo's to lose as it stands. But Sunderland are a bit more bullish in terms of what they've done from an attacking front. Now, Enzo Lefay's loan was made permanent for £20 million from Roma, which is a brilliant news for everybody associated, I think, with Sunderland Football Club. He was such an important part of how they got up there, and it felt like a bit of a steal when they got him in the Championship. I'm excited to see how he gets on in the Premier League. Now, it didn't go particularly well for him when he made that switch from France to Serie A, but I do think that there's a space for him to become the kind of creative hub here. And then on the wings, they've brought in two really interesting players, one with Premier League experience in Simon Adingra, who didn't really fit with Fabian Herzler. The high press system didn't do all that much for him. But I do think that Adingra is a good player for Sunderland. And it feels like the kind of move that has turned a few heads. Signed a 5-year deal at Sunderland, which I thought was really interesting. And on the other side, they've signed Chemsedine Talbi from Club Brugge, who is 20 years old and was kind of seen as one of the most exciting young wing prospects in Europe. So that adds to the fact that Sunderland have already got a really young squad, right? Like, we talk about this quite often. We talked about it last season when they were in the Championship, but this was a young Sunderland side who have been kind of turned over in these few years since Louis Dreyfus took over as the chairman. They've brought in some really interesting young talent, and they've kind of done a really good job of developing that young talent to the point that they are now back in the Premier League. I'm quite excited about this collection of talent. Now, there is always question marks, right, about how it's all going to fit together, how it's all going to work. And right now, if they start the season and they were to play out this season with the defensive unit that they have, they're in real trouble, right? Like, I don't think anyone's suggesting that they're not. I think one of Dan Ballard and Luke O'Nien can play. It can't be both of them, because Luke O'Nien is, for all of his talent and all of his ability to play the ball out from the back, is quite small, and I feel will be targeted by Premier League defenders. And Dan Ballard is about the opposite, incredibly physical, obviously had a magic moment in terms of the Coventry game, but it's described by some as having 2 left feet, which I think is a bit harsh, but he's not the most competent player in terms of getting the ball out from those back areas. So they need someone that's going to do one or the other, right? Like there needs to be an ability to complement those players. I think Trey Hume is going to be really interesting at right back. They need a keeper and a centre back desperately. And then maybe one more in the attacking areas. Although I think that Mienda and Isidore could be very interesting in the Premier League. But this for me is an exciting one because I think that there is a chance that Sunderland actually explode out of the blocks. They got a relatively soft start. The question for them is, can they build up enough of a buffer? Because Sunderland are going to have it really tricky when it comes to AFCON, and they're going to lose a lot of key players in key areas who will make that period and kind of traversing that period between January and February quite difficult for them. So can they get themselves into a situation where their heads are above water in mid-December? If they are, then this team has the possibility, I think, to shock a few people. And I think that's exciting for the Premier League in general.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that start is going to be key. They've got West Ham at home, which is a really nice game to begin with, given where West Ham are right now. They're pretty much on the floor, really, West Ham. Their fan base are not optimistic at all. Graham Potter is not fancied by many people at this stage, and they haven't undergone the sort of team rebuild that they needed. So that's a great first game to really rattle West Ham. And then you go Burnley away, which is one of your rivals. You need to win that one. And you got Brentford at home. Again, like a team that's early on the ropes because you're reacting to changes and serious changes at Brentford that have gone on. So 9 points out of 9, Jack, from the first 3 games for Sunderland. And then, it gives you a platform. But even if they don't go perfect, just getting that first win is what matters so much. And from those 3 fixtures, at least you have that hope, because often, it runs beyond that and you're sinking and you suddenly gone without trace almost. And that's what Sunderland have to avoid. I think that their transfer business is pretty good. I do like the Adingra one. I think Adingra is an exciting signing both in the real world and in the FPL world. I think that Adingra is a good one. But obviously they're going to be up against it.
The other thing that I think that Sunderland have going for them is that I think they'll stick with their manager. Now, there are ups and downs to changing manager, but we kind of seen that it's really difficult to get that manager in the middle of the season who's going to turn things around. We saw it last season. I think that Reggie Lebris is going to be given the opportunity to take this Sunderland side as far as he can. And if they end up getting relegated and have to go again, I think that they would probably take that. I think they have a real belief in him in a way that Leeds don't with Farker and that Burnley almost certainly don't with Scott Parker, right? Like, there does feel like Sunderland have that in the tank, that they're willing to kind of stretch it and be like, we're going to back the manager, we're going to keep faith with the manager and see what we can get to. I think that's probably a strength, given how difficult it is to bring in someone to kind of, right a ship halfway through the season. How often, obviously it used to be a bit of a thing. We used to see firefighters, etc., etc. How often in recent times have we seen a team struggling at the bottom change manager and actually drag themselves out of it, especially as a newly promoted club? Not very often. And I think that probably works in Sunderland's favour.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that sometimes clubs do need to be patient and just accept they need to go through it and kind of come through it together again. But I can also understand that trigger reaction and the response to bad results because there's so much at stake. So it'll be interesting to see if they have got the ability to ride the waves when they come.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to take a little break there. When we come back, we'll be headed to the continent for 3 more teams having interesting windows. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to Ranks FC. Jack is doing a sterling job of running us through the stuff that I don't usually talk about because I don't have the same knowledge as Jack about these subjects. And he's going to continue now by taking us into the continent. So off you fly, sir.
Let's go to Italy, shall we? And let's go to the Italian reigning champions in Napoli. And part of me feels like, we're talking about a summer of not necessarily change everywhere, but we're seeing change at Milan with Max Allegri coming in. We're seeing change at Atalanta with Ivan Juric replacing Gasperini. We're seeing Gasperini off to Roma. We're seeing a new manager in, Christian Chivu at Inter. And we're seeing Igor Tudor, okay, given the reins after half a season at Juventus, but some real changeability and a lot of people unsure about what that is going to look like as well. And I imagine at the end of the window, we're going to be talking about Juve as one of the very interesting teams, but there's not enough business quite through the door yet. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're done. Napoli have had a look around. They've taken stock of the situation. And they've gone, right, this could be a good moment to step on the pedal, Liverpool style. And I was looking at their business and thinking, wow, actually, that could be quite special. So in terms of their outs, they've not really lost anyone. So Nathan has gone to Betis after being on loan there last season. They got £7.5 million for him. Elia Caprile, who was on loan at Cagliari, has made his loan permanent at Cagliari, £6.8 million. Kind of keeper who spent the second half of the year there. I think he started the year at Napoli. Cyril Ngonge played a little bit for Napoli, but not very much. 35 appearances over a couple of seasons. He's gone out to Torino on loan with an option to buy. Michael Florencio, who was on loan at Fiorentina last season, has gone on loan to Cagliari. Jesper Lindstrom, who was on loan at Everton last season, has gone on loan to Wolfsburg. And Rafa Marin has gone on loan to Villarreal. Now, he was brought in from Real Madrid last summer as quite an exciting player. He made 6 appearances. Made 6 appearances over the course of the season. Conte decided he wasn't his guy, and he basically didn't get a look in. So from those, Napoli are losing about, 14 appearances in total from those players.
Yeah.
Now look at who they've brought in. Right, so they bring in Sam Berkema, who's been absolutely brilliant for Bologna as a centre-back over the last few years. He joins for about £27 million. Brilliant ball-playing defender, really good at taking the ball out from the back, really kind of composed, well put together. Obviously was at one point Riccardo Calafiori's centre-back partner at Bologna. He now makes the move to the Champions to join an already pretty stacked defensive cast, but makes it a lot younger. He's 26. They bring in another centre-back who's 20, Luca Marianucci, who was pretty impressive, I thought, at Empoli last season, despite the fact that they got relegated. He joins for under £10 million. They bring in some goalkeeping depth. They bring in Vanja Milinkovic-Savic, brother of Sergei, who is coming on loan from Torino after being Torino number 1 for so many years, with an obligation to buy on loan for about £20 million, but they won't have to spend that till next summer. So they have goalkeeping backup in there. And then they go, all right, we'll bring in Noah Lang to add some depth from those wing areas where we were a little bit light last season. And PSV are shedding players left, right, and centre. We could do a whole episode on them at this point. But he joins, 26 years old, was brilliant at Club Brugge, was good at PSV, but hasn't really set the world on fire in the way that I think that people expected him to. Now gets an opportunity in the big leagues in a place like Napoli. They bring in Lorenzo Luca, who is like 6'7", comes in 24 years old, on loan from Udinese. He's worked his way up through the tiers. I really like Lorenzo Luca's story. He signed for Ajax for a bit, didn't really get a look in. But he comes in as a kind of absolute battering ram option that they can utilize alongside Lukaku, alongside Raspadori, with the potential to add maybe a Darwin Nunez in there yet to come. And then they bring in Kevin De Bruyne on a free from Manchester City, right? So obviously, not quite at the same youth level that he was at some years ago, but still with an important part to play. They sign Anguissa to a new deal. They don't lose any of the guard that have kind of taken them to the Championship. And you're looking at them saying, well, Napoli are stocked, aren't they? And now I appreciate in context that Conte's sides tend to struggle a bit more when they have the rigors of European football on them. And thus, bringing in 7 or 8 players to kind of flesh out this squad and make sure that there's enough rotation pieces and there's depth in each area makes loads and loads of sense. But right now, I'm looking at it going, Napoli have basically lost no one. And they've brought in 5 players who I think could be difference makers with potentially more to come. That is really, really interesting business from a Napoli perspective.
Yeah, and they seem to be avoiding Garnacho, and they so far avoiding Jack Grealish. So they're also having to make key decisions on players that are kind of been pushed in their direction as well.
Give me Jack in Naples, please. Please give me Jack in Naples.
I mean, for some reason, it doesn't seem like he's particularly as open to moving abroad as he is to staying in the Premier League. But there is definitely still something in the works there. Garnacho, maybe not so much now. United tried to press him in that direction before the window opened, and Garnacho wants to stay in the Premier League too. But yeah, obviously, like on the back of what happened last season at Napoli and the togetherness that was built, you've got to be very careful at how you then add players to the dressing room. Not so much just in a football sense, but in a personality sense. But someone like De Bruyne obviously sets a great tone in terms of professionalism, in terms of the level you're now at and how you are not going to be allowed to settle. Like, this is where you now need to get to. We have got one of the masters of his trade coming in to make sure that you lot keep striving for more. And that, I think that sets a really good tone. So I don't think they'll be done yet, mate. I think that there'll still be more to come. And it's definitely a good thing for Italian football that they have kept their foot on the pedal.
I wonder if Conte does go back to a back three this season, because you look at this centre-back cast now, right? Like, I know Juan Jesus is not getting any younger, but Alessandro Buongiorno, Juan Jesus, right? Amir Rahmani, who was absolutely brilliant last season, and I can maintain is never given the credit that he deserves as a footballer. And now they've obviously added Marianucci and Sam Berkman to that list. That's four very, very good centre-backs and a youngster with the potential to absolutely go through the roof. Like, for me, that's a very, very exciting team. And I think that if they do go to a back three, we could be seeing some very interesting things coming out of this Napoli side. Just before I move on, in terms of Darwin, what is the movement there? Because that felt like it was a goer earlier in the summer, and it seems to have gone a little bit quiet.
I think Darwin's going to pick up by the end of this week, I think, on what's going to happen with him. Obviously, the Luis Diaz exit has taken priority at Liverpool at the moment, and that's going to be the case when you've got a high-profile exit and it's accelerating. But straight on the back of that, Darwin has to go. And so I think that, by Friday, I would expect to have some clarity on exactly where they see that position and which clubs are genuinely still in the frame for him.
Okay, there we go. Well, we wait to see if Napoli push the button on that one, because that could be a really, really kind of wild one to add to this already pretty heady mix at Napoli. But looks like good business from Aurelio De Laurentiis for Antonio Conte, who was obviously convinced to stay at the start of the summer. Right, let's flip away quickly. We'll come back to a team that I think have done really interestingly good business for the last one. But I want to go to France quickly and talk about Lille, because Lille have had a bit of a blowout, and it's not been particularly pretty. So Jonathan David leaves for free to Juventus after 109 goals in 232 games, which is pretty stunning, right? There's some costs associated with it, and I think they're going to get a nominal fee, but it's not loads. They lose Angel Gomes, who has been excellent for Lille for the last few years, on a free to Marseille. And whilst Remy Cabella's influence has very much faded in recent years, 108 appearances in 3 seasons suggests to me that he was still a pretty key part of this Lille setup, right? So he departs to head off to Olympiacos for the swan song of his career. And as mentioned earlier with Leeds, they lose Gabriel Gudmundsson, who's been pretty much the starting left wing back for this team for some time, for £10 million. So effectively, they've brought about 15 million euros through the door, and they've lost 4 key players, which is really tricky from where I'm standing from a Lille perspective. Now, they've done some interesting business to try and replace them. One is bringing back Oli Giroud, who comes back from LAFC on a free, comes back now 13 years away from Liga, but returns to lead the line for Lille, which is going to be intriguing, I think, in many ways, especially considering his struggles at LAFC. But they've picked up some interesting players. I don't think they've filled the holes for what it's worth. They've not brought a striker in. They've not brought a central midfielder in. But they have brought in Felix Correa, who was a former Manchester City youth prospect, went off to Gil Vicente in Portugal, 6 million or so. He's established himself now in the side. I've been watching him for a little while and thinking, yeah, there's still very much a player in there. And I think he's one that has the potential to get better and better. And the other winger they brought in was Marius Froholm from Rosenborg. He's a Norwegian under-21 international. Very exciting. And another one of those players that, is potentially going to come from nowhere at Lille, and people are going to be talking about him in a big way in a couple of years. And in terms of youngsters, they also brought in Nathan Ngoy from Standard Liège, who is a Belgian under-21 international. And he comes in. So they've spent about £15 million, 20 million euros. So they've not currently, they're not burning the books. They're not spending loads and loads of money. But right now, for me, this team looks like it's short in a central midfield role, in a left back role. And the question mark is Olivier Giroud going to be the guy that can keep up with the goal return that Jonathan David was putting out for this Lille side? So whilst it's not as much business as some of the other teams that we've discussed and will discuss, I think that, you're looking at these teams in terms of a couple in, a couple out. Currently, Lille look like they've been absolutely stripped of a spine. They've lost their starting left back, their starting centre forward, their starting centre midfielder, and a winger or kind of attacking midfielder who was deeply influential and kind of the experienced head within the side. Now, that experience is replaced, fine, by Giroud's introduction. I still think this team are missing some really, really key parts in terms of moving forward next year.
Yeah, I think that there's a strong chance here that the cracks are going to be exposed. That's probably the way I would set the scene with Lille where they are right now. They've gambled, and unless we see some movement that is reasonably significant in terms of reinvestment, I think they're on a bit of shaky ground, to be totally honest. They're a side that you expect to be in those Champions League positions, and there's a danger that they become just mid-table. That's how I would view what we've seen so far from them. But obviously, there's still time. Maybe there's something up their sleeve. But at this moment in time, it does look a little bit risky to me, Matt.
Yeah, look, there are other players within this squad who can fill gaps. I'm not suggesting that they're going to start the season with 10 men on the pitch or anything like that. But I'm just a little bit wary of where the goals are coming from, right? Like there's a lot of wingers in this squad, a lot of whom are very talented. I wonder if there is going to be a space for Ngayo Macau, who obviously broke out last season when we saw a couple of those goals in the Europa League, and everyone got very excited about for a little while. 20 years old, he's someone that's an exciting player. Does he take the Remy Cabella minutes, perhaps? Like, that could be exciting. And Lille have a history of finding kind of uncut gems and really turning them into diamonds. So there's potential in a number of players that they've brought in. But I think that they are relying a lot on those players coming good quite quickly. And there's a lot of pressure. Now, sometimes pressure makes diamonds and sometimes it cracks floors. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, I think the Lille are going to be a really interesting one to keep an eye on, to see, one, what they do for the rest of the transfer window, and two, what next season looks like when you remove a couple of the big Jenga pieces from a tower that look pretty strong at times over the last few years.
If they also lose their goalkeeper, Lucas Chevalier, then we are looking at dangerous times. PSG going after him strongly at the moment as they struggled to agree new terms with Donnarumma. So at the moment, Lille seem to be holding out for pretty big money on that one. So maybe they realise just how uneven ground they're currently standing on if they lose this bit as well. But then again, if you end up getting 50 million in, maybe it does help you paper over some of those cracks that I just mentioned for one more season.
Yeah. I'm actually, one of the players I didn't mention them bringing in was Arnaud Bodard, who came in from Metz, who's 27 years old, is a perfectly reasonable kind of Liga stalwart. So if they do get £50 million through the door for Chevalier, maybe they use that to kind of reinforce the other positions. And maybe that's what you have to do sometimes in order to actually, make it work when this amount of players leave for free. But it does feel like the ground is being moved from beneath their feet in terms of not selling those players when they had the opportunity to make serious profit on Jonathan David, on Angel Gomes. They've all been taken away at this point. So we shall see.
Silly.
Right, final one. North of that, south of that. Let's go to Madrid. Let's go to Atletico Madrid. Because last year, obviously, we spoke about the fact that Atleti were having this kind of mad game-changing summer. They spent kind of inordinate amounts of money, and we've not seen them really do that before. And they followed it up by doing exactly the same thing again, Dean. They have absolutely gone for it, is what I would say about this Atletico Madrid summer. Now, just on the outs front, there's a couple of big ones. Rodrigo de Paul has obviously gone into Miami on loan with an option to buy. Saul Niguez, who's obviously been phased out a little bit over the last few years, but he's been associated with Atletico Madrid for 17 years, and he finally departed the club. There's been obviously loan spells, etc., etc. Finally departed the club, going off to Flamengo on a free transfer, which is, one of those ones that makes me a little bit sad. Like Saul was Atletico for me for so many different years. And they also lose Reinildo, who was part of the left-back rotation. He's gone off to Sunderland, as we kind of mentioned earlier. But they have absolutely stepped on it again, which I think is really, really interesting. So they brought in a backup goalkeeper in Juan Musso, who was on loan there last year, £6 million from Atalanta. Feels like a really smart bit of business. They also brought in a goalkeeper from Real Madrid, which doesn't happen very often, on a free transfer. Mario De Luis, who's 23 years old, and says he's very excited about the challenge he's taking on. Whether we see him play any football whatsoever or not, I think is probably yet to be decided. But they've added David Hanko, friend of the pod, from Feyenoord for £26.1 million. Obviously, winner with Feyenoord of the league in the Netherlands, the Eredivisie, and the KMV Becker. So 27 years old, brilliant player in terms of bringing the ball out for the back, absolute leader. I think that Diego Simeone is absolutely going to love David Hanko, and him alongside Lenormand could be a really interesting centre-back pairing, I think, for Atletico next season. Now, whether they go to a back three or maintain that kind of situation that they were kind of messing about with at the end of last season, yet to be seen. They brought in Marc Pubil from Almeria, who obviously got relegated, but I think that he's a really exciting player as well. 22 years old, won Olympics with Spain a couple of years back, and someone who has the potential, I think, to get to the very top. So he's coming at right back. At left back, they brought in Matteo Ruggeri from Atalanta for £14.6 million. Obviously can play in midfield as well, but that's a pretty much whole new back line that they could line up if they wanted to, which I think is going to be interesting. In the centre, they had Johnny Cardoso from Betis for £26 million. Brilliant for Betis last season in their run to the Conference League final and their push up the league table as well. I thought that it was going to be an interesting battle for his services, and he feels another one that Simeone is just going to absolutely love. Hard tackling midfielder, can do a little bit of all of it, but I think he's best when he's allowed to just stay at the base and destroy and let the ball off to other players who have a little bit more creative juice than he does. And they're going to have players with creative juice because they've also added Thiago Almada from Botafogo, who I think will play a little bit further up as a winger, but also Alex Baena, who I think has the potential to potentially play in centre midfield if they need him there because of the creativity that he possesses. Now, there's always a question mark, right? When you get a creative player going into Atletico Madrid, under Diego Simeone, are they going to flourish? I think that Baeno's work rate is going to mean that he will flourish. And we've seen, the likes of Griezmann, who is an incredibly creative player, come up trumps for Atleti time and time again. But what Simeone wants from those players is to have the work rate to match it. It's why we, think that Joao Felix never worked out at Atletico Madrid in the way that perhaps we thought he would. But I think that Baena has a little bit of all of it. And I cannot wait to see Julian Alvarez running on to Alex Baena passes in behind with the amount that he can create from those areas. So there's a lot to be excited about from this Atletico Madrid summer. I wonder if we're going to start to see the Sorloth-Alvarez partnership more in tandem. I wonder if we're going to start to see the phasing out of Antoine Griezmann a little bit more this season, with Baena coming in and taking on some of that, with Almada potentially coming in and taking on some of that as well. The midfield rotation looks really impressive from where I'm standing. Obviously, you lose Rodrigo de Paul, and that is going to be a blow because he's been, an absolute key part of how this team have operated for the last couple of years. But, Koke remains. You've got Conor Gallagher in there and Pablo Barrios, who I think are an incredibly talented midfield pairing. You now add Cardoso to that as well. And you're thinking, okay, where does Marcus Llorente fit? Where does all these players fit? It looks really good from where I'm standing. I'm really, really excited about seeing what this Atleti side look like in this iteration. And I think that this could be a side that does go on and challenge. We thought that they might last year, but I think that what we've kind of taken from them, what we've seen from them, over the summer is filling in the gaps that needed to be filled in, picking up players who are able to take on the mantle from the ones who have served them so long for so brilliantly for such a long time. And I really can't wait to see what this side looks like, what the formation looks like, what the actual system looks like under Diego Simeone next year, because I think that this has the kind of bones of a team that can really challenge in La Liga.
Yeah, it's definitely ambitious, but Atleti have done what they always do, and they kind of temper that by also being pragmatic at the same time. It's not without risk. Some of the players that they're bringing in might not work out. But I think a lot of it will come down to simply how quickly this team can now gel and how these new signings can gel and fit into the Simeone system and how they manage to compete with the elite in this league, which Atleti obviously are always threatening to do in order to combat Real Madrid and Barcelona in that sense. So it is exciting. And, for some people won't feel like the actual personnel themselves, the names aren't the sexiest, like Cardoso, they might be like, whatever. But Cardoso's a great signing. That's a really good signing. And so it's now for me just about, if they settle well, then this starts well. But if it doesn't, and the players have to kind of start proving themselves quickly, then you might get a little wobble in terms of how they set their stalls and get those early results. But it's fun, like you say, and I think it'll be fine.
I mean, I take your point about not the sexiest names. And look, maybe, Alex Baena doesn't sound like the sexiest name on paper, joining from Villarreal.
I like Baena a lot, so that's fine.
Baena has created the most chances in La Liga over the last 2 seasons. He's reached the most assists in La Liga over the last 2 seasons. And the big chances created, I think only Lamine Yamal has created more, right? So we're talking about a player who has it all from a creative perspective. And I'm just really excited to see how he gets on. Obviously, he's played with Alexander Sorloth before at Villarreal, but how he gets on with Julian Alvarez, who snaffles up those chances for fun. I think this is a lot of fun. I'm really, really excited to see what Atleti look like at the start of the season. They're probably the team that I am most gagging to see when the season begins, to see what this all looks like when it's put together. And I don't say that very lightly.
So that was a legit ranking, and they've ranked in at number 1.
No, it wasn't really. It wasn't a ranking, but they are. I think it would probably be, if it was a ranking, it would probably be Atleti 1, Sunderland 2, Leeds 3, Napoli 4, Lille 5. They're interesting from a very different capacity. It could absolutely fall apart. So we will see. With that,
great effort, mate. Great effort.
Day.
A lot of talking.
You
did a lot of talking and a lot of explaining, and we appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you listening to me. I thought that it was something fun that we could look at things from a slightly different angle. So I'm hoping that everybody enjoyed it. All that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate. Thanks you.
Thank you very much. I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you all very shortly, Rank Squad. But for now, take it easy.